Now more than ever, people need to go within and plug into that cellular memory, plug into divine source, detach as much as possible from the matrix. Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to Bartley's Commentaries on the Cosmic Wars. Today I'm going to talk about a few subjects. The first will be this alleged attack by the U.S. Marines on the headquarters of the CIA at Langley, Virginia. I'm also going to talk about Archontic element behind the vulgarity agenda that's being pushed. David Icke gave a very good talk on his website the other day, or maybe it's been maybe a month or so by now, about the connection between transgenderism, if that's a word, the transgender agenda, artificial intelligence, and depopulation. And they're all connected, but there's also an archontic, negative entity, demiurgic component overlay to that, which I wanted to get into. And it's also tied into the 5G rollout, which we're going to see before too long. First of all, about this alleged attack by the Marines. I don't even really know why I need to go over this, but I just wanted to kind of add a bit of realism to the whole discussion. The notion that a Marine Expeditionary Unit is going to land in those dangerous Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft and storm the headquarters at Langley, Virginia, is patently absurd. Langley, Virginia, the CIA headquarters, is a hard target. It's a fortified installation. There are surface-to-air missiles, in all likelihood, on the roof. There are strong points located on the outside and on the inside. Were a successful attack to be accomplished, there would have to be people on the inside that would grant access to all the choke points, the access points, the checkpoints. It's not like in the movies where they just run down the hallway and they're clearing out, this room and that room. It's a large installation. It's a large base, and each corridor would have to be taken and held. Each access point would have to be taken and held. They would have to find a way to use their own computer experts, their own hackers, to shut down or disable the computer networks inside the base, inside the headquarters, which provides security, which oversees and monitors the CCTV, the remote access entry points, etc., etc. They would have to force their way in, either through the main entrance or with breaching charges, blow holes in the wall to gain access. It would have to be, they would have to have multiple points of entry. They would have to land on the roof. They would have to, break their way in at ground level, etc., etc. And moving a Marine Expeditionary Unit or its equivalent would create one hell of a footprint, because all of the ordnance is accounted for, the logistics train, the helos, the tilt-rotor aircraft, the so-called Ospreys, known colloquially as Marine killers because of their propensity to crash land and crash and kill all the Marines on board. You would have to have all the supplies. You would have all the logistics and the fuel, the ordnance. All that has to be accounted for. So they would have to go off the books if they're going to amass the kind of ammunition and ammunition resupply in order to sustain such an effort. And obtaining and moving around that amount of ordnance will not go unnoticed. Somebody along the line will know. And always remember what the late, great L. Fletcher Prouty said. He said that within the military are many active duty CIA personnel. They look military, they sound military, they act military, but they're really CIA operatives. throughout the armed services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and of course the Marines are are a part of the naval service. It's just impractical. It sounds too much like a Hollywood movie, actually, and that's the problem. Is that so many people, even so-called truthers, they've been malignly influenced by Hollywood. When they think of CIA operations, or when they think about covert operations, they envision an operations center with big view screens, multiple monitors, all these people sitting in rows with their own computer terminals, kind of like NASA mission control, right? And that does happen. But just as often, you have the private networks. Long before there was an official intelligence community in the United States, these informal intelligence networks, which linked the financial world, industry, media, and the military intelligence community, had been in existence for a long time. And nowadays, increasingly, you have privatized intelligence, privatized mercenary firms. You go back to before World War II, you have the secret meeting place called The Room, and The Room was on 34 East 62nd Street in New York City. Unlisted phone number and kind of a dingy, rundown apartment. Some of the power hitters of the day used to meet there and plot and scheme. William Wiseman, who was a de facto head of British intelligence in the U.S. during World War I, a major player in City of London financial circles, he used to meet at The Room. He was a close confidant of Colonel Edward Mandell House. Vincent Astor, a multimillionaire, and later became a commissioned officer in the Office of Naval Intelligence. Franklin D. Roosevelt had commissioned him. Used to meet at the Room. Nelson Aldrich, millionaire, multimillionaire banker, connected to the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, the Warburgs, etc., used to meet at The Room. Kermit Roosevelt, even before he gained fame as being a CIA operative much later, used to meet in The Room. William Donovan, before he became head of the COI, Coordinator of Information, and later on the OSS, the predecessor of the CIA after World War II, he became ambassador to Thailand. He was closely involved with the Thai military, Thai intelligence, Thai police functions in Thailand. Victor Rothschild used to go to The Room. And the point I'm making, and then others used to go to The Room. You had people like David Bruce, married into the billionaire Mellon family, later became head of OSS in London, if memory serves, and then he became, among other things, head of the, ambassador of the Court of St. James in London, right? He used to meet with the Royal Lizzies. He used to go to The Room. So what I'm talking about are private, informal intelligence networks made up of fabulously wealthy people connected to high finance industry, the armaments industry, media. Also think about large, what we would now call transnationals, like Jardine Matheson, which operated in the Far East for a long time, run by the Keswick brothers, Tony Keswick, Joe Keswick, if memory serves. And the Keswick brothers later, no surprise, became deeply involved with British Special Operations Executive SOE in Asia during World War II. Jardine Matheson made a lot of their money in the early days, basically running opium. And their competitors in the opium trade were the Russell Trust. The Russell Trust created the Skull and Bones. So, again, we're talking about private corporations which can field their own armies, have their own intelligence networks, have their own logistics. And nowadays, fast forward to the modern age, you have these transnationals, Bechtel, Halliburton, You have this whole profusion of privatized military firms. Long before Blackwater, there was Military Professionals Resources Inc., which worked in the Balkans, actually worked side by side, trained and fought alongside with Al Qaeda when they destroyed Yugoslavia. So it's more than just the CIA at Langley. It all sounds sexy. It all sounds chic for the Marines. And again, Hollywood influence. When you think of the U.S. Marines, you think of the flag being raised at Iwo Jima, etc., etc. John Wayne movies, Sands of Iwo Jima, ridiculous movie. People are just so influenced by Hollywood, even people who call themselves truthers. Langley CIA headquarters is not a soft target. It would make far more sense for these plotters and schemers if they really wanted to take down the perps and not just hit a bunch of targets simultaneously, but in the run-up to the big operation, make all these perps at varying levels disappear, have accidents, and there's no evidence to suggest any of that has happened. None whatsoever. And then hit a bunch of targets simultaneously, soft targets, that will, key nodal points of these formal and informal structures that will have a cascading effect. When you hit one, it has a detrimental effect on all the other ones. Instead, they go for the Hollywood option of attacking CIA headquarters at Langley. That's what we're told. And look who the source of this story was, folks. Hal Turner, a guy who was proven to be an FBI informant in court, right? So that's who started all these stories of the Marines attacking Langley. Was a guy who has been exposed by Alex Jones and others as being an FBI informant. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Now Stu Webb and a bunch of others have jumped on the bandwagon, and believe it or not, Stu Webb is citing Saoirse Fall as a source. Saoirse Fall, a known disinformation artist going way back to the early days of the internet, for crying out loud. This is the same Saoirse Fall who talked about this huge crane falling down, and crashing into the cube in Mecca, and then the freaks over at Wolf Spirit Radio, one of them who think they're the living reincarnation of General Patton, says that, when the crane came down, it cracked the cube open and all these jinn escaped, and these people at one of the Wolf Spirit Radio shows, I'm not saying all, but one of them, these freaks over there, one of whom think they're the living reincarnation of General Patton, says they tamed all the jinn, and now they got the jinn working for them. These are the kind of whack jobs that are out there. And, the point of relevance is the whack jobs over at Wolf Spirit Radio, one particular show, they cite Saoirse Fall. And now Stu Webb is citing Saoirse Fall, who's just adding on to the Hal Turner story. It's ridiculous. And then you look at all the stories about the Marines' attack at Langley, and let's get something straight. Langley Air Force Base is in Hampton, Virginia. Langley Air Force and NASA have a co-located base in Hampton, Virginia. CIA headquarters is at Langley, Virginia. It's two different places. Now Stu Webb is citing information from Saoirse Fall. It's gotten so ridiculous. A movement that large, just the logistics train alone, would attract too much attention amongst the CIA and Mossad types that have infiltrated all along the supply chain, all along the operations networks. Somebody would have been wise to it. You cannot keep a movement like that quiet. Not only that, though, if suddenly a whole bunch of Ospreys and helicopters started moving towards Langley, the first thing the FAA, the first thing the National Command Authority would ask is there an exercise going on? Is there a drill going on? Why do we suddenly have all these helicopters and Ospreys heading in a given direction, i.e. Langley? And when they realized there wasn't an exercise going on, they would have all these contingency plans that would kick into effect. Why haven't all the bases around the U.S. gone on to alert? Because if an insurrection was in progress, that's exactly what you would expect. A lockdown. No one goes in, no one goes out of all the bases, all the federal buildings, all the FBI, CIA offices. And why do they attack the CIA? Why don't they go after NSA? Why don't they go after the other? There are over a dozen intelligence agencies in the U.S., all of them beholden to the financial controllers. I'll tell you why. Because it's sexy, it's chic, it's trendy for the U.S. Marines, the flag wavers at Iwo Jima, to go after the CIA. What makes more sense is if they go after simultaneously a number of soft targets and also find all these accountants, the ones that are responsible for managing these offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and in the Bahamas and in all these different places all over the world. Find those guys, abduct them, use enhanced interrogation techniques, whatever, to find out where all the money is. And then it doesn't stop there, folks, because you have to do something about their comms. You have to do something about their ability to utilize their controlled media to spin the story out of recognition, right? So this whole story of the Marines attacking, Langley headquarters is a non-starter. It really is. When you just look at it at face value, take it at face value, it's just patently ridiculous. When, as I pointed out a moment ago, so much of this is determined by these informal private networks, like I talked about the Room and the years leading up to World War II. All these shakers and movers who later become big shots in who already are big shots in high finance, and who later become big shots in the intelligence community when the U.S. created an official intelligence community with the OSS at the head of the U.S. intelligence community, which at the time was roundly opposed by Army intelligence, G2, naval intelligence, the FBI, etc. And that was a whole other story. These intelligence agencies in the U.S. already existed. Like I said, Vincent Astor was given a commission to be an officer in the Office of Naval Intelligence. And it's interesting how so many of these scions, these rich perps from the rich bloodline reptile families, how when they join the military, invariably they land on their feet and they wind up in intelligence. Right? You look at Prescott Bush, the father of George the Elder, big-time intelligence player, even after his days in the Army. You look at even John F. Kennedy, who winds up being in the Office of Naval Intelligence. That's where the secrets are. That's where the power is. That's where the information is. And these informal networks are the ones that are doing the shaking and the moving behind the scenes. And increasingly, as I pointed out, intelligence is privatized now. There's so many corporations that their function is intelligence, security. Some privatized military firms can lay on an entire command structure, battalion, regiment, or higher even if they need it. And with all the support, logistics, intelligence, comms, etc., etc. So just going after the CIA at Langley is not going to do anything about all these privatized intelligence firms, intelligence security corporations, etc., etc. Not only that, but you have the problem of all these people with dual hats. One moment they're officially undercover in the U.S. intelligence community. The next, they're sitting on the board of a transnational corporation. They're running operations for a privatized mercenary outfit, etc., etc. So you have all these people in the revolving door between intelligence, the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, etc., etc. And some of these people are dual citizens, dual U.S., dual Israeli citizens, too. So, that's another issue that needs to be addressed. So just going after the CIA at Langley doesn't address all those issues. It's a movie, folks. And I'm not, getting down or bagging out those people who fell for this, right? I mean, we all need hope. We all need to hang on to something, to believe in something. But it just smacks too much of Hollywood anyway. And before I shift gears and talk about the Archontic Overlay underpinning of the Transgender AI Depopulation Agenda, I want to talk about the the perhaps looming war with Iran, because the powers that be are really ratcheting up the tension in the Persian Gulf, the tension in the Middle East, and I hope it doesn't happen. It wouldn't surprise me if something was done along the lines of the sinking of the battleship USS Maine in Havana Harbor, which triggered the 1898 Spanish-American War, the first war of imperial conquest for the U.S. And of course, think of Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese were goaded into attacking Pearl Harbor, and the defenses of Pearl Harbor were deliberately left to rot. And whenever the commanders at Pearl Harbor tried to do something about it, the Army Navy commanders, they were prevented, and then later on they were served up on a platter as scapegoats to the American public, because I can see something like that happening, right? I can see something like that happening because I see two possible scenarios. One is some kind of huge act of sabotage is done to inflict a lot of harm on U.S. naval forces in the Persian Gulf and blame it on Iran. Or the U.S., at the behest of their masters, would goad or otherwise compel the Iranians to retaliate, which would result in the destruction of one or more carrier battle groups, and also think of the amphibious ready group, all the Marines crammed onto the so-called Gator carriers, the Muse that we spoke of earlier. They have specially designed assault landing ships. I forget the official designation for them, but the nickname is Gator carriers. They look like miniature aircraft carriers, and they're two basic types, and some of them carry the jump jets, the Harriers, and others carry the helicopters, the heavy lift helicopters, and they're used to transport these ships, these Gator carriers, to transport the Marines to different places in the world, so the Marines can effect an amphibious landing, right? In the narrow, constricted waters of the Persian Gulf, those U.S. carrier battle groups and those amphibious ready groups, which feature the Gator carriers hauling the Marines around, they are sitting ducks. When you look at the terrain of Iran, when you look at the shore of Iran, those towering mountain ranges, any one of them can conceal launchers for anti-ship missiles. And then when you look at the naval capabilities of the Iranians, and these military analysts and these armchair experts, these flag wavers, they go, oh, the Iranians, they don't have a navy, they have these little destroyers and destroyer frigates and all these little gunboats. Well, those gunboats have been fitted out with rocket launchers, anti-ship rocket launchers. And we're not talking about exosets anymore, folks. Years ago, the Russians provided a lot of low-altitude, sea-skimming cruise missiles that fly at high speed, basically unstoppable. And then the Iranians went a step further and created their own anti-ship missile capability. And for people who grew up watching, these war-promoting movies put out by Hollywood, Top Gun, etc., and for people like me who grew up reading about the fast carrier task forces in the Pacific, based on the Essex class carrier in World War II, which I always thought was fascinating. It's it's difficult for them sometimes to wrap their minds around the fact that the modern carrier battle group is obsolete, especially in a place like the Persian Gulf, which is one used choke point. These anti-ship missiles, they have a range that exceeds the old French-built exocets. In the old days, whether it's ship launched or shore launched or launched from a plane, the exocets had to get, within something like, can't remember, 50 miles or something of their targets. These new anti-ship missiles, which are supersonic, have a range that exceeds that. And just imagine dozens of these puny, silly gunboats fitted out with these anti-ship missile launchers, just skirting all over the Persian Gulf. How is the U.S. Navy going to stop them? Never mind the destroyers, the frigates. The Iranians have a submarine now too, at least one of them. Never mind all the anti-ship missile launchers on shore. The mountainous terrain of Iran overlooks the Persian Gulf. They automatically have an advantage in the high ground, where tactically and strategically they can look down upon the naval forces amassed in the Gulf. And all you have to do is think about the Falklands War. And it wasn't just the exocets. A lot of those planes, the Argentinian planes that got through to the task force, the British task forces, just dropped plain old dumb bombs, not even smart munitions, but just plain old dumb bombs that wreaked all kinds of havoc on the British naval vessels. So the point I'm making is, when you look at a U.S. aircraft carrier, and those super carriers, they hold up to something like 7,000 sailors and Marines. So the point I'm making is, if just one or two of these anti-ship missiles hit these aircraft carriers, it's going to cause all kinds of havoc. All those Marines and sailors on board, mostly sailors, they're sitting ducks. Now, I saw the video of the USS Forrestal, the disaster during the Vietnam War, and if memory serves, what happened was live ordnance beneath a wing of, I can't remember if it was a Corsair or a Phantom, or what plane it was, but the rocket was accidentally discharged on the flight deck of the Forrestal, and this rocket went off and set off a chain reaction. All these secondary explosions, all the avgas, aviation gas that was all over the place, all the ordnance, cooked off all this ordnance, all these secondary explosions. In short order, the USS Forrestal, bad name, bad karmic name to give to an aircraft carrier. It's funny that the U.S., which prides itself on going around policing the world and, saving people from dictators like Gaddafi, who gives his people, so much promise, so much hope. Oh no, they got to get rid of him. And they keep naming their aircraft carriers and their warships after people they've assassinated, like James Forrestal, SecNav, Secretary of the Navy, who was pitched out of Bethesda Naval Hospital because, among other things, he knew about the alien situation, right? So they go and they name an aircraft carrier after him. And then back to the story about the ordnance, this rocket or something shoots off beneath the wing of this plane on the flight deck of the USS Forrestal aircraft carrier and sets off a conflagration. Pretty soon, from bow to stern, the carrier is on fire and is a no-hoper, and all the sailors on board are basically pretty screwed. So just think of these anti-ship ballistic missiles slamming into U.S. aircraft carriers, and think of all the 7,000 or so sailors on board. It's like they've got nowhere to go, folks. And I could see how they could spin it out and make it seem like another Pearl Harbor. Oh, our defenseless nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed carrier groups out there. We're threatened by these Iranian gunboats, which they used to laugh at, the Iranian gunboats. They used to laugh at the Iranian frigates, but now they come out shooting these missiles, and they're defending their seas, they're defending their territory. The U.S. Navy doesn't belong there. Always remember that. So on the one hand, they can do some kind of sabotage and blame it on the Iranians, or on the other, they could provoke the Iranians by doing something stupid, and then the Iranians retaliate, and then pretty soon these missiles start slamming into these obsolete aircraft carriers, and then, here we go, the balloon goes up for an expansion, another major war on top of all the other ones. And, the intention is to eventually get the U.S. to not only use their Air Force and naval aviation and naval assets to wage war on Iran, but eventually to get boots on the ground, right? It's not going to be the Israelis. They're not going to put their boots on the ground. They're going to want the U.S. to do that, right? Look at the problems the Israelis had in Lebanon the last couple of times. They'd rather have the U.S. put their boots on the ground. So keep that in mind. Since we're on the subject of military things and the Marines attacking Langley, etc., I want you to keep in mind the possibility that if they're going to leave these huge carrier battle groups and these huge amphibious ready groups featuring the Gator carriers with all the Marines and sailors on board, in an age of supersonic anti-ship ballistic missiles, okay? Those people are sitting ducks. And you know what? It's like they signed up for it. And they're out there provoking the Iranians and, by extension, provoking the Russians. And if they get themselves in a pickle, they got no one to blame for but themselves. Right? So, keep that point in mind. So enough about that. I'm going to talk now about the archontic element of this transgender AI depopulation agenda, but I'm talking about it from the standpoint of the vulgarity agenda that's being pushed. Why do the cultural Marxists want to push vulgarity? Why do they want to push pedophilia? Why do they want to push bestiality? It's because, and why do they relentlessly criticize everything? The media, the comedians, everything. There is everything that's good, everything that's wholesome, everything that's makes civilization, makes society great, is relentlessly critiqued, relentlessly scrutinized, relentlessly criticized, all across the board. In sports, you name it. And the idea is to foment these OCD thought loops in the minds of anyone who happens to be listening, and get them into a negative, critical mode. And if you can add in OCD thought loops of vulgarity, of filth, of perversity, so much the better. And so I'm going to talk about that and how it has an archontic aspect to it. The underlying foundation of it is archontic, as it pulls and plugs those people who buy into all that into this lower nether dimensional space. I mentioned a moment ago, even in sports, we see this relentless criticism. Let me give you a recent example. Darren Dalton was a member of the early 1990s Philadelphia Phillies baseball team. They played the Toronto Blue Jays in the World Series. They lost, but they had a very good crew back then. Darren Dalton, John Kruk, a number of people on that team. And Darren Dalton was a catcher who played through a lot of injuries, played through a lot of pain, and he was very good to the local community in Philadelphia, right? He was well known for his charitable efforts, etc., etc. He passes away, and amidst all these former teammates talking about what a man, what a player, what a teammate Darren Dalton was, how good he was for the community, out of the blue, this Jewish sports writer, I forget his name, he comes on and he says, "Oh, Darren Dalton, he used to go to strip clubs. He used to frequent prostitutes. He used to go to prostitutes all the time. He used to go to strip clubs. He used to drink. He used to do this." At a time when everyone's talking about the passing of this guy, at a time when everyone's reminiscing fondly about the person they knew, the friend they knew, the family man they knew, this guy's got to pop up out of nowhere, this nobody journalist that I'd never even heard of before, and start talking once again about all the peccadillos of Darren Dalton's life. And there's no way that we could confirm whether or not it's true. Suddenly this Jewish sports writer pops up out of nowhere and says, "Oh, he frequented prostitutes, he went to strip clubs." Again, it's the relentless critique, the relentless criticizing of everything. And we see this all the time in sports because of the utter control that the cultural Marxists have on media, and in particular on sports in America. This is why simultaneously, all the black athletes, like, they've been trained so well, they all just, drop down to one knee, and they won't stand for the national anthem. And it's their right to do so. But, is it their idea? Or has the Black Lives Matter / cultural Marxist types, gone to town on them and are compelling them to do that? You see, because I don't see it as an organic, spontaneous thing. When all these people, all these movie stars, so-called, all these musical artists, all these athletes, all simultaneously start chirping out racism, etc., etc. That's a coordinated effort to create more conflict, divide and conquer, hate on whitey, white privilege, right? This rage about white privilege over and over and over. And the point being is that instead of simply saying Darren Dalton, he was a great ball player, he's a great teammate, we're going to miss him, he did a lot for the community, once again, the cultural Marxists have to point out that, whether real or not, we'll never know, that Darren Dalton used to go frequent, strip clubs and used to visit prostitutes, etc. They've always got to drag it down to the mud. They've always got to reduce everything to the lowest common denominator, bring it down to the most vulgar level. They can't even let you just reminisce and say, "Yeah, Darren Dalton, he was a good ball player. I remember him. Yeah. He was good for baseball." No, it's not good enough. We got to reduce everything down to the lowest common denominator. And that's the point I'm making about the Archontic Overlay. By instilling this relentless criticism of everything. For example, now, I was just reading this article yesterday. These headmasters in these British public schools, they're now saying, we can't refer to girls as girls, we can't refer to boys as boys because it's offensive. It may instill anxiety in them. It'll create confusion in them. Well, that's the whole idea, to create confusion in them. And their point is, we must not impose our will, which is a joke, because that's exactly what they're doing. We must not impose our will into them to make them think they're one gender or another, even though they're born a certain gender, you see. It's gaslighting, folks. It's gaslighting on a massive, mega, cosmic scale. People always talk about gaslighting, right? But the powers that be, the cultural Marxists, the media, everything is all about gaslighting. And it goes back to what Willy Munzenberg said. He was one of the key players in the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxism. They want to make society stink. They want to make civilization stink to this never-ending critique and criticism of everything that's good, everything that's wholesome, everything that is of tradition, wholesome, good, beneficial to society. They want to tear that all down and replace it with, you can't call a boy, you can't call a girl. Let them make up their own mind, when really they're the ones instilling all this confusion, right? And now local, state, and federal governments are entirely on board this transgender agenda. They're saying, these kids, it's like it's their right to learn about sex in the classroom. It's their right to have access to pictures of graphic intercourse and essentially pornographic things, and even the children's books that are coming out now. And I took pictures of this one children's book I came across because they keep pushing these rectal, anal obsessions. And the book that I came across was a book about a farm and the farm animals, and every page, every cartoon picture was about the butt of a particular farm animal. And you get to the last page, and then you have this goat leering at the naked butt of a farmer, right? And he's bent over waiting for the goat to do its thing, and the goat has a lascivious look on his face. And of course, if you know the Luciferian aspect behind it, the goat is the goat of Mendes, folks. That's who the goat is. And then you see, the farmer bent over. He's got a big rip in his backside, his pants, and you see that the area around his bum is all bruised and reddened and inflamed. And it's just like either the goat just had a go at him, and is going to have a go at him again, right? And that's the implication it leaves with you. It's everything is rectal, everything is anal, everything is, going against organic source. Everything is going in the direction of this Luciferian, Talmudic, like hellstorm, basically. So getting back to the point about AI, transgenderism, depopulation, when one makes it so it's the norm to reduce everything to a vulgar level, not only does it instill OCD thought loops in people, where they begin themselves to relentlessly criticize everything that's good, right? And it's also playing on the fear thing because, the controllers, the master manipulators, the psyops people, they know how to play on fears. The fears of not being normal, of not being accepted, the fears of what would happen if, we don't go along with the norms, then we become the outcast, right? The medical community plays on this. The ones fomenting all this false flag terror play on this. Fear, keeping us in that primordial, fear-based level, and then overlaid on top of that, this relentless critique, the muddying of waters, the vulgarity. Think of Saturday Night Live. Think of Comedy Central. Just nothing but vulgarity. I grew up watching Monty Python. I grew up watching the Fawlty Towers show, Dave Allen at Large, where this was intellectual humor. It was stuff that was funny, that touched you at a deep core level, that made you think at the same time. They were imparting lessons. They were getting points across. Now all that's been replaced by this cultural Marxism vulgarity. And when someone, and it's just like as you pluck one string on a guitar, pretty soon all the other strings start to hum or resonate in the same key as the first string that was plucked. It's the same with bad association, right? If you're around people that are constantly negative, or are constantly harping about this, bad, that, and the other, and a lot of surface level truthers are like this, or just endlessly chirping about how bad, how negative it is, and you part ways with them, and you just want to get into a negative ion bath, because they're just so negative. They bring your vibe down, and that's the whole idea, right? Is to bring down the vibe of everyone and everything, because it makes you a happy hunting ground for these negative archontic entities. I guarantee you, countless numbers of these surface level truthers who can't see from a higher dimensional perspective. They only see all the oppression, the persecution, the manipulation, all the fear, all the surface level machinations. They've got those people tied up in knots. I guarantee you a lot of them are entity infested. They cannot help but be entity infested if all they talk about is negative stuff. I mean, someone walks up to you and within 30 seconds they'll be talking about something negative, right? And that's the whole idea. The OCD thought loops incur never-ending, incessant thoughts of hopelessness, despair, impotent rage, etc., etc. We're going to have Jerry Marzinski and Sherry Swiney on the show, and they're going to talk about the OCD thought loops and how they're really entities. I had Jerry on the show before, but he's going to come back again, along with Sherry, his colleague. And they're going to talk about these OCD thought loops and the voices, just schizophrenics here, they're really entities, and this is something we've known all along. Some of us have, but Jerry's coming at it from a clinical standpoint, and Sherry is coming at it from someone who divested herself of all these voices in her head because she realized they were really entities. And so we're going to have a whole series of discussions with Jerry and Sherry, and I'm really looking forward to that because, again, folks, we're solutions oriented here at the Cosmic Switchboard Show. We're not just going to lay all this negative on you and then just go away and leave you, just in a disempowered, bummed out state. That's not what we're all about. We're all about imparting knowledge, information, wisdom that is empowering, that will strengthen our spiritual muscle, so to speak. So, getting back to the AI transgender depopulation archontic overlays, also by harping on the negative and by the media and Hollywood always pushing the negative, these negative thought forms and the energy behind them. And remember, so many of these musical artists nowadays, they're Luciferian puppets, basically. They have alter personalities, they're under control. All the symbolism in their music, the lyrics in their music, whatever weird subliminals are in the music, they're just pumping out a steady stream of energy, bad vibes, OCD thought loops, etc., to drive down the vibration and drive down the state of being of everyone who listens to the music, basically. And you add to that the OCD factor, where in America in particular, so many of these radio stations incessantly play the same songs over and over and over and over and over again. It's precisely to instill these OCD thought loops. So you add in all the vulgarity, you add in the relentless criticizing for criticizing's sake, you add in all the divisive divide and conquer, and what happens is all these people that are exposed to that energy field, they become vulnerable to this archontic manipulation. They begin thinking in OCD thought form loop terms about negative things, about vulgar things, about perverse things. And look how they're targeting the children. In the children's books I talked about, in the classrooms with the Safe Schools agenda. Safe Schools is provably, demonstrably been created by pedophiles, by child molesters who wrote these so-called scholarly papers and whatnot in America, scholarly only to other pedophiles. And they're the ones that started this Safe Schools agenda that's rapidly spreading throughout the Western world. They're normalizing this. They're normalizing the perversity. They're normalizing the pedophilia, the child molester agenda. So be mindful of this chatter in the mind. Be mindful of the chatter of those around you. Be mindful of the chatter that's being spewed out by the corporate media and the Hollywood types. And we know how perverted and disgusting and Luciferian Hollywood is. That's what they're all about from the start. What people really need to do is start to connect the dots. And you, the listeners, can play a role in this. You don't have to be a crusader about it, and you don't have to be annoying about it. But you can tell the people, look, and all these different institutions which are held up in high esteem, be it, the court system, how many judges and how many people in the court system have been exposed as perps and pedos. Look at Hollywood. How many people have been exposed? How many high-powered movie moguls, producers, directors, actresses, some of them, but mostly actors, have been exposed as perps? How many politicians have been exposed to perps? And so, how many doctors have been exposed as perps? And people need to connect the dots. Why do these perps always seem to gravitate? And why do doors seem to open to them to allow them to get to positions of power and influence in the media? Some of the very same people that are telling us what to think in the media themselves are perps. We have the whole BBC scandal with Jimmy Savile, etc. That was just a tip of the iceberg. So people need to start connecting the dots. Why are all these institutions which are in the business of making us think their way, be it politics, be it the court systems, be it the medical system, the sports field, why are there so many perps in them? Sexual predators, child molesters. Because that's who's running the system. That's who's running the show. The ones that have been exposed, and they're allowing to be exposed, those are expendable types. They're just going to throw them under the bus. But it underscores the true nature of the system. And that's the dots that need to be connected. And I'm glad all this is coming out because it's the truth vibes that David Icke talked about, the truth vibrations. What we're seeing with all these revelations of all these perps all over the place, that's the truth vibrations in action, right? So let's focus on that rather than, all this stuff that's coming out about the perversity and the predatory behavior of all these Hollywood types and musical types, and see it from the half full perspective of, yeah, just more of the same vulgarity, more of the same hopelessness, more of the same victimization. No, let's take comfort in the fact and let's applaud those who've stepped out and said, yes, this person, Kevin Spacey, he harassed me back in the day. This perp, and look at Kevin Spacey's facial structure. Look at his eyelids. Look at his hooded eyes. I never jumped on board the Kevin Spacey bandwagon. Okay, I'm one of the last. I'm one of the last baby boomers. I was born in 1964. So, I grew up in an age when I was watching actors like Marlon Brando, like Olivier, George C. Scott. People always rave about, in L.A. Confidential, when Kevin Spacey was shot and he sat there in the chair and he did that little death rattle. Ooh, I got chills running down my spine. Ooh, and The Usual Suspects, Kevin Spacey, they kept pushing Kevin Spacey as the new flavor of the month, and a lot of people fell for it. I never did. You want to see a death scene? Look at George C. Scott in the movie where his family was exposed to toxic nerve agents in a U.S. Army experiment. And at the end of that movie, spoiler alert, George C. Scott finally succumbs. He's crusading on behalf of his dead son, and also, his whole family was affected, but his son died from the exposure to germ warfare, and he spends the whole movie trying to expose it, and in the end, he succumbs to it, and then his whole body is just spazzing out, and he's just shaking from head to foot and dies. Just this horrific death from a nerve agent. Okay, you want to see a death scene? Watch that one. Forget about Kevin Spacey and his little death rattle in L.A. Confidential. I never fell for whenever they push somebody and make them out to be the next flavor of the month, that's a red flag for me, right? So, I never fell for the Kevin Spacey bandwagon. I looked at his facial structure. I look at his hooded eyelids. I look at the negative reptile energy emanating from him. And look at this Charlie Rose guy. Doesn't he look like a reptile to you? Long ago, I looked at Charlie Rose. I looked at his facial structure. Looked at his hooded eyelids. He looks like a reptile to me. And again, to connect the dots. Why do people like them always wind up in these positions? Because it's a system that was created by them for them. Right? It's like a big contagion, like an ink spot that grows and grows and grows. And when you explain this to people, and you get across to them, look, all these perps, they're in influential positions of power where they're in positions to influence us, right? Think of all the countless people that were influenced by just watching Kevin Spacey in his movies and in that TV show of his that was recently dropped by Netflix. Just the negative vibe that the viewers are picking up just by watching him, right? So, again, there's an Archontic overlay to the relentless hammering that we're receiving on all sides, and it's a frequency war. I keep saying that. So what we need to do is gird ourselves with the proper frequency tools, the proper mindset, the proper energetic vibe, and it'll bounce off us like water off a duck's back, right? So keep that point in mind, please, that there is an Archontic overlay underpinning behind the whole AI transgender depopulation agenda. They want to make it so everybody's entity infested, everyone's subject to malign influence. Everyone is having to deal with OCD thought loops that are running and controlling their lives, right? To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Anyhow, we've reached the end of this week's segment of the Cosmic Switchboard's commentaries, actually Bartley's commentaries on the Cosmic Wars. If you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.